This part of the tutorial will show you how to texture oceans when using reference images from Google Earth. Now you're going to see I've actually got some of the mountains done, and that's because I did my mountain tutorial before I forgot. You do need to texture the oceans before you start trying to texture your terrain, and that's because we're going to use a trick that's going to preserve all these beautiful coral and sandbars from Google Earth that don't require detailed textures. For example, if you go to the mountains here, you start to look like crap. You really have to hand paint them. You'll learn how to do that later. But the oceans look great. You get up under the water, it's still just fine, because water distorts the image. So what we're going to do, and what the problem is the default texture inside. Whoops, let me zoom out here. Slow my speed down. The default texture inside Crisis, or inside the map editor, is this grass. Right there it doesn't look like grass, but out here it sure does. So what we need to do is paint the oceans and the beaches with the correct textures, but then we want to preserve the color from our reference image. There's a little trick to do that. So all you got to do at first is pull out the layer painter, pick a fairly large radius for your texture, a low hardness so that they blend into each other. And so let's go with beach sand dry. Let's just start painting some of these areas. Don't worry if you get up on the cliffs, you'll clean them up later. And also don't worry about covering up these trees. Now normally when you want to paint, like for example these cliffs, you need to be really careful about your base color. But we're going to actually replace the base color after we paint. Increase my hardness a little bit here, so I don't end up with a bunch of grass in my sand. So I'm painting all the edges of these forests, and actually the whole forest can actually, at least in this particular area, can be sand. Now I'm going to switch to wet sand, even though this is still dry beach in this particular area. Only because the wet sand has a much smoother look. The wet sand needs to blend in a little bit better here. And you can blend these all again later. Get more detailed. Again, same premise as the terrain. And I'm only going to do this beach, so for the sake of the tutorial, do the areas around these rocks. Don't worry, we'll get that rock back, so that they at least have a sandy edge. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the ocean so I can see under there. I'm going to go with a much larger radius. I'm actually going to paint all this entire sandbar as wet sand. If you wanted to hand paint this, you would have to be changing your color, your brush size. Whoops, what? Wrong, entirely brush size. Undo that. I wish this slider had a little bit better settings. There we go. If you had to paint this all by hand and try to get the same look, require hours and hours of texturing, changing colors. So there's nothing that can match Mother Nature. So if we zoom down, some of the areas that are tapered or aren't fully painted, they'll have a mixture, which is just fine. And then we're going to paint the reefs. So for the reefs, I'm going to pick underwater. Again, don't worry, they are getting painted the right texture, just not the right color. If you have any detailed scenes under the ocean that you want, you can paint the oceans as cliffs, as detailed as the mountains. I just really leave them at default because I don't plan on going out there, and by the time you get down there, it's so dark anyways. That should be good enough for now. Now, look at all these textures. Whatever you do, do not generate surface texture at this point, because you'll keep these colors. What we want to do is re-import our terrain. Same way you did in order to get our reference image in the first place. Now it looks like we just undid all of our work. But if you zoom in down here now, this is reefs, which will have plants later. This is sandy beach, dry sand. And we still have our beach. And even now that these are here, if you started painting, wrong button, again, you're going to lose your colors again. So what we need to do to lock these colors in, after you've painted your areas with the right textures, is generate your surface texture. Now this is going to be the end of the tutorial, because this is going to take quite a bit of time, because I always do high quality just to keep the reference image up. So that'll be the end of this part of the tutorial.